Hi there, Nicholas Vince here. This week on the Chattering Hour, I'm joined by Julian Sands. We talk about his extraordinary and enriching experiences filming The Killing Fields, how A Room with a View was very nearly cancelled, flying in Warlock, spiders in Arachnaphobia, and rats in Phantasma dell'Opera, David Cronenberg's Naked Lunch and Boxing Helena. We talk about those and much, much more. Up next on the Chattering Hour with Julian Sands. Julian Sands' career spans over 30 years and includes titles such as Oxford Blues with Rob Lowe, Ken Russell's Gothic, Leaving Las Vegas, The Painted Bird, and on TV, 24, Smallville, and Stephen King's Rose Red. Julian, thank you so much for joining me here today.
My pleasure, Nick.
So firstly, I wanted to start with kind of take you right back to the very beginning, if I may, and your childhood. So you were born and brought up in Otley in West Yorkshire?
No, the Otley connection is a bit of a misnomer. I happened to be born in Otley, the nearest hospital when my mother went into labor, I suppose, but I never lived there. It was up the, not very far away, about 8 miles up the road.
Right.
A village called Gargrave, and the nearest town will be Skipton, not Otley.
Right.
And I grew up in the Yorkshire Dales till I was 11 with my brothers and my mother. My parents had split up, which was quite a radical thing in the 1960s. And we had a wonderful Swallows and Amazons, Huck Finn, Tom Sawyer, very rural, very free childhood. And then, and my brothers all still live close to where we grew up. So I go up and see them often. I still love the Yorkshire Dales for the countryside, for the walking, but for the people.
Yeah, I have family up in Halifax. The Yorkshire branch
is, the West Riding and it's further south.
Yeah,
different. We were more in the limestone country, but
right. Well, yeah, in the Dales, then I'm immediately thinking of James Herriot and
rightly so. Yeah.
So when did you get into acting?
Well, I was always interested in performing. As a little boy, my mother was part of the local amateur dramatic society in the village. And there was in the village pantomime and then nativity plays. And remembered asking a teacher when I was about 7, how do you become an actor? I mean, maybe I don't know what I sounded like, but they said, it wasn't something anybody had any reference to or any understanding of. So, but age 11, I got a scholarship to go away to a boarding school in Hampshire, and that really shifted the axis of my thinking, because away at boarding school, there were people from many different backgrounds, a much broader cultural education, I think. London was close. We'd go to theatre, museums, the galleries, and also locally Farnham Rep was very active. So I became much more, and the school drama society was very active. I was very immersed in it, and the debating society. And although I always liked the idea of being an actor, it seemed remote. And I thought about many, many other ways to spend my life. But I was in the school debating society, sort of filling in UCCA forms, university forms. And somebody, a girl from a school we were debating with, said to me, you should think about being an actor. And she gave me the prospectus for the Central School of Speech and Drama in London. And I applied and I was accepted. And although at drama school, I had the most rich and thrilling time, London 76 to 79. It was a huge spectrum of experience and energy and anarchy and radicalism. It was fantastic, but everybody seemed so much more glamorous and talented and confident. And yet I, doggedly never allowed my belief to be compromised. And the first 2 or 3 years after drama school, just working in little youth theatres and theatre and education, pub theatres. A lot of the people I'd been so admiring of, I don't want to say envying of, but admiring of, humbled by, had decided they couldn't hack the life of being an actor. I mean, sharing digs, living in squats, going hand to mouth, the palpable insecurity every day. But I loved all that. And then, and I was in lots of people's home movies, little independent movies from the Filmmakers Co-op. Derek Jarman was a huge influence, great friend and supporter during that period. And then I, through a series of circumstances which were fairly circuitous, I ended up auditioning for the role of Greystoke, Tarzan, in the film Greystoke Hugh Hudson was making. I didn't have an agent, but I'd been spotted and recommended, and there were many, many people auditioning. And the first incarnation of the production, I was being groomed. I was doing monkey training and gym work and all of that. But then then it all got put on hold. But the director, Hugh, wanted me to stay on training with the monkey people and in the gym and becoming Greystoke. But Putnam left the project. And by the time it was set up again, new producers, they wanted to see more new people. They wanted that, and I wasn't ultimately cast as Greystoke. Christopher Lambert was, and did a very good job. And yet during that period, I did have an agent. I got an agent who was expecting, I don't know what. And Roland Joffe, David Putnam had left that project to go and set up the Killing Fields. With Roland Joffe, a group of journalists in Cambodia, set in 79, set in 75, and filmed in 83. And he wanted unknown people to play these roles and was happy to meet me, Roland. And I was cast as the journalist John Swain, Sunday Times journalist. And that turned out to be the most formative, extraordinary, enriching, profound experience, for which I can only think was so much more important than Greystoke might have been. Greystoke might have gone in things in a different direction. But there I met amazing people, formed real friendships which still endure. And Roland Joffe, I've worked with him again, playing Louis XIV in his film Vatel with Gerard Depardieu. And we're talking at the moment about doing a film about classical music and during the period in Germany of the Nazi period with the Jewish camps. So anyway, so that was a long answer to your very simple question about Otley.
That's a brilliant answer. So I've just been ticking off questions as you've been going through. It's great because you talked a little about the Killing Fields, obviously, and you're saying it's incredibly formed. What was the most challenging part of making that film?
There were so many, and I mean, at a basic acting level, I hadn't done I'd done these little couple of TV things and a little bit of, Super 8 work with Derek and other people, it was believing in myself that I'm an actor and I'm in this big movie. Should I be acting, performing, or just, but Roland was brilliant at just saying, stripping all that, forget your training, you don't have to, just be. I think that was the performing challenge, was just to be. But emotionally, psychologically, being immersed in that material, which deals with the Khmer Rouge and the policy of genocide in Cambodia, working and living with the many people who'd come through that experience. It was so humbling, but so meaningful in as a life lesson. Thank you very much. That I've just been served the most extraordinary Scotch egg, and it was so the challenge was just enduring with my sanity intact, I'd say. 16 weeks in Thailand. It sounds so exotic and glamorous, and in many ways it was, but immersed in this, diabolical material, which ultimately prevails with something life-affirming and hopeful, with the survival of Heng Nor, played by Dick Prawn.
I thought, I was watching again and research. I saw it years ago. I must have seen it on TV. I don't think I saw it in the cinema, but I think what struck me particularly was the boys, the children with guns, because the Khmer Rouge were so young. They were teenagers.
We went to a prison, a refugee camp on the Thai-Cambodian borders, and which were being administered, I think, by the UNHCR. But amongst all these refugees who we could meet and talk to, they were clearly being marshaled, regulated by Khmer Rouge cadre, who were then there as faux refugees. But they were kids, kids. Yeah, it was very shocking.
Yeah.
Very shocking.
Yeah. Well, then you finished that, and made long time.
No. Let's keep talking.
Let's keep. So, well, sorry, what I was meaning, you finished making The Killing Fields, where you met John.
Sorry, I thought you meant.
No, you carry on eating. I'll talk whilst you're eating. I know you became friends with John Malkovich.
Yeah, dear friend. I was chatting with him this morning. It's funny. Roland was very concerned that John and I would have antipathy, because Roland saw me as this sort of sensitive English guy, and John from kind of rough, urban New York, indulgent background. The moment we met, it was just such an instant bond, which endures to this day, which is wonderful. It's
really unusual to actually make that kind of friendship in this business. That you.
But I tell you what, without John, it would have been very difficult to sort of endure that 4 months with a feeling of togetherness, I would say. I mean, quite a number of people working on the production had breakdowns of one kind or another. But it was great.
Yeah, and then you went on to something completely different, which is A Room with a View, The Merchant Ivory, A Room with a View. Did that just come about as a normal casting, or did they call you in? Or?
Yeah, I'd done a couple of films in between, and because what I knew after The Killing Fields was that the more film experience I could get, the more confident and competent I would become with the medium. And I liked the medium very much. and I, spent time training for theatre and done theatre, but I sort of eschewed theatre opportunities in the interim. So I had worked on things, and then my then agent said, Jim Ivory, Ishmael Merchant would like to meet you. I had seen their films. I'd been familiar with Savages and the Bostonians, and I liked the aesthetic. It was a straightforward. I mean, there was a meeting, there was a reading, there was a subsequent reading with other girls who might play Lucy. Filming began in Florence, and it was the most incredible picnic, and such a harmonious group of people, so elegant, and so nobody. I think they tried to cancel the production the week before filming because they just didn't see it having any market. And the provision was, look, from Goldcrest, I think, was we will do this, but only if you can have John Travolta playing my part and Glenn Close playing Helena's part. Kind of, admiring as I am of both those players, it's a bit odd. But Ishmael prevailed and got things filming, and it was, there still is a sort of an enduring global reference to what romantic love can be. And of course for Florence, I mean, it must have put so many billions into its economy from people who wanted to go there. Prior to that, it was a little bit of an academic destination on the sort of grand tour.
Right.
It became this, a place of love, which it still is.
Yeah, it's a beautiful, beautiful city. I remember going there as a kid. I was curious because this is obviously based on a book. Had you read the book before?
No, I read it. I hadn't read any Forster. No, I'd read Passage to India, and I read Room of the View, but honestly, much better just working from Ruth's script. So I read it with more attention a couple of years after we'd filmed.
Right, right. You then went on, I mean, another film I'd like to talk to you about is Gothic, playing Percy Bysshe Shelley. What sort of research did you do on that? Or again, did you just look at the script and saying, this is how it is written, this is the character I'm going to play?
Well, more the latter. But I had studied Shelley at school. I had a sense of him. I met Richard Holmes, who'd written this extraordinary biography called Shelley, The Pursuit. But you can do all the prep you want. When you're working with Ken Russell, it doesn't matter because he has his own ideas, and it was pretty intense and crazy, demonic in some ways. And he drove the film far more than any performance choices I made. I just reacted to what he wanted, tried to anyway. It's very gratifying that people still, talk to me about that in very favorable way. But it's Gabriel was wonderful to work with as Byron, and dear Natasha as Mary Shelley. Natasha Richardson, I'm talking Gabriel Byrne for your listeners. It was very high energy, very unregulated, in the sense that he was an auteur. He was operating the camera, he was lighting, he was shouting a lot because nothing ever quite, he didn't like to compromise. And as you know, when filmmaking is all about compromise. And but I enjoyed it. And interestingly, about 4 or 5 years ago, I was asked to write the preface to a new anthology of the work of Keats and Shelley, which has been published by the Keats Shelley House Museum in Rome. And it coincided with me working in Rome on a film. And I was happy to write that preface and really reconsidered their work. At school, it all seemed a bit middle distant to me. I was much more into Harold Pinter and Ted Hughes, this sort of muscular, economical writing, contemporary writing. And I found the passion, the intellect, the philosophical, political depth and intensity of their writing, both Keats and Shelley, different, was just so thrilling. And I said, look, I'd love to do a reading at the house, which resulted in doing 15 readings because they all, there was people wanted to come. It's not a big space. And then I've taught that in theaters, the Keats Shelley show. It's not called the Keats Shelley show, but there is we did during lockdown, during COVID time last year in August, there was a window. I went to Rome and we recorded it live with a small audience, and it's on YouTube. I can send you a link if
Please
you like.
do.
And for any of your listeners, if you want to see it, it's Keats Shelley live in Rome, Julian Sands, just putting Keats Shelley house, Julian Sands reading, it'll come up. I was very, and I was supposed to be doing it at the Edinburgh Festival in August, but maybe next year.
Yeah. Hopefully things will start returning. I'm absolutely fascinated that you're, because I know Keats because we studied Keats at school, her school. But I'm really unfamiliar with Shelley, so I'd love to hear you reading. You're talking about.
When I talk about them, I tell this story briefly, and it's not. It's an abbreviated version of the show. I tell their story through their words and my own.
Right. So you mentioned Ted Hughes.
Yeah.
And you're a big fan. Are you familiar with his Oedipus Rex?
Well, I've read it. I've never seen it produced. No. But I used one of Ted Hughes' poems as part of my audition at drama school, I remember. Hawk Roosting.
Oh, yes. Yeah. I've got the book, The Crow poems, on the shelf behind me and so on. Yeah, I'm a big fan of Ted Hughes. And the writing of the Oedipus Rex is just so brilliant because of the way he breaks. He doesn't use punctuation, he uses spaces. And it's extraordinary. When did
how I do my emails?
Do you so you kind of moved to America when did you kind of make the switch from being based in the UK to America?
After Room with the View, I did a film called Siesta in Madrid, also with Gabriel Byrne, and many fantastic actors, actresses, Isabella Rossellini, Jodie Foster, Alexi Sale, Grace Jones, Martin Sheen. It was a surreal film, a sort of Tibetan Book of the Dead, kind of. Mary Lambert, who had done Madonna and Prince videos. And when that was finished, I went to stay with John Malkovich in New York, just for a couple of weeks, and it was a relationship, and I was breaking up, or it had broken up, and John's then wife was going out on tour in a play, so I went to stay with him for a couple of weeks. I mean, that was a plan, 2 or 3 weeks, but I met someone else whilst I was there, which wasn't a plan, but I did, and so I stayed on a little bit, and then kept just extending the stay. And she was living in New York, she's a New Yorker, and so I stayed on. And then, but I should say, and John had introduced me to her, but 35 years later, we were still together. So there was a good reason to stay on. And
Yes.
you know, if you're an actor, you kind of live on the road. You go, so I have a base, I suppose base camp would be America, but I love living in England. I'm English and lucky enough to have a place near this pub. And so it's sort of probably, there's no set pattern as to how the time is divided.
Right.
It's a satellite, you know.
Right. Now, one of the films that you did that I wanted to ask you about is Warlock.
Yeah.
I was curious, how much of the aerial work, the flying work, were you able to do yourself?
It was all me. It was all digital.
Right. Yeah.
So everything was analog, I suppose you call it. We had green screens, but for me to fly, that meant me being in a harness in a rig and being swung around at the end of a rope on a crane. And, you know, I loved all that. It was sort of, wow, I'm flying. You know, it was great physical stuff. It wouldn't be allowed now because of health and safety, but and it wouldn't be necessary now because they would digitalize it all. But it was old school Warlock, much of it, which is why I think it has enduring charm to those who are interested in that film and films of that sort of genre, which I was very much growing up. Loved Hammer horror. Loved Cushing and Chris Lee so I was thrilled to play Warlock. When I've been up.
Sorry, no, I was going to ask you, mentioning, because I meant to ask you earlier on about the films that you watched growing up. So was it horror or science fiction or
anything, everything? Really? I think, you know, if I had a favorite film, I had many favorites and war films, of course, were so, you know, Guns of Navarone and the whole genre. Westerns I loved. Zulu was, when it came out in New York, I think I saw it every night for a week. And my brothers still to this day call me Zulu. I mean, that's their name, Zulu, because to go from Julian to Zulu is not difficult.
Right. Amazing. Yeah, I remember seeing that in the cinema when it first came out. Extraordinary effect. It's just an amazing story. And and Michael Caine and Stanley Baker, not Stanley Baxter, but Stanley Baker.
Not Stanley Baker.
A different talent entirely. Another scary movie that you did was Arachnophobia. Did you have to deal with any real spiders during that? And are you okay with spiders?
Many real spiders, and they all had 8 legs. I do not have an issue with spiders. I'm perfectly happy with them. And there's certainly the scene, my death scene, where Frank Marshall directing wanted spiders all over my face. They tried putting them on during a couple of takes, but they'd all run away, so they couldn't get a critical mass for the effect. And so they said, look, the way we think we can do that, if we put a fencing mask on your face, cut a hole out, put a funnel, drop all the spiders in, spoon them in. And once they're all in a sort of mass, we'll pull the mask away and then we'll get the shot. And I said, sure, that's fine. But to do that, I just sort of put my mind in a Zen state, because all these critters, you know, with their legs running around your eyes and lips, and you know, but it was a good shot. People loved it or it freaked them out. I did a film of Il Fantasma dell'Opera, Phantom of the Opera, for Dario Argento, where he wanted me lying in bed with rats all over me. And I am much more, I am a little phobic about rats. They give me that kind of strange reaction. And, but again, you know, you just put your mind in the thing and all that little scratching around your foot. And so that's what you know, acting can be very emotional, deeply psychological, almost intolerably unburdening sometimes, but it can also be a lot of fun. It's fun. And so you find the way to have fun with whatever the particular challenge is.
Right. Because one of the other, another extraordinary film that you're in, which I only watched recently, and that's Naked Lunch.
Oh, yeah.
David Cronenberg. Now, I mean, I said on this channel before, my connection, because of course he was filming Nightbreed when he was working on the script.
Ah, okay.
And Gabriele Martinelli, who was one of the producers on Nightbreed, went on to do Naked Lunch. That's the closest I have connection. What was the experience? How did you get involved, and what was the experience?
Well, I was offered it. I mean, I'd met Cronenberg. I'd met who wrote it? Tell me, who wrote Naked Lunch?
William S. Burroughs.
Yeah, I'd met William Burroughs in LA at a gallery where he was showing some of his artwork, and there was a dinner afterwards. And this was before the film was talked of. He was a strange man, as you'd imagine, as he comes across in any interview. Sort of creepy, but interesting. And this, I'm not even sure I'd read Naked Lunch. I sort of thought I'd read it because it was one of the books one should read, but I read the script and thought, wow, this is kinky. And I said, of course, yes, happily. Cronenberg, when I met him in Toronto, was the most kind of retiring academic, like a librarian or an English teacher. It's so not what I expected. That I saw the film at the time, but I saw it again about 6 years ago at a festival. It's so subversive. It's so bizarre and weird and political. It would never get made today, for sure. So, but I'm very happy to have been involved with it.
Yeah, I was looking. I was amazed at the effects. Peter Weller, I think. I mean, it's a great cast throughout. You've got Ian Holm, Peter Weller.
Yeah.
And an extraordinary thing. You're talking about David Cronenberg, and thinking you worked with lots of different directors. Do you have a particular style of direction or director that you enjoy working with? I'm trying to say, you know, how do you like to be directed, if that's a proper question?
Everyone's different. I mean, as minimally or as specific as they want. I macro, micro, mega. I don't mind whatever they want. The director is the filmmaker, and I am happy to collaborate. I was just in Hong Kong filming with Mike Figgis, my 9th film with Mike Figgis, which is pretty amazing. And and one of the reasons I like working with him, because he is such an auteur and has such a sense of what he wants, and yet it is open to the surprises you can bring, and is really worthwhile. Is really substantial. He's intelligent, has a visual gift, has a sense of his own work, but he's been a performer. He was an actor. And did a lot of sort of performance work with a troupe called the People Show. And I think mostly I like working with directors who have some empathy for the acting process. Quite often they come from a technical background and therefore don't really understand the resonances of what performance. That's okay. You compensate for that. You get it. So I'm not. But I like the people who really understand it. But and the less technically exact and accurate type of film, art films, independent films. I just did a film with Glenn Danzig, who had a band called the Misfits. Yes. And he, his fantasy was to make a spaghetti Western vampire thing. And he figured out with his, small cameras and limited budget, that there was a lot of enthusiasm and interest in this kind of almost home movie experimental genre. And it's called Death Rider in the House of the Vampires. And every member of the cast is a vampire. And it's fantastic. The trailer is on YouTube and worth a peek.
Yeah,
But what I loved about working with Glenn was that he was so unfiltered, because he didn't come from any sort of prepared filmic background. Independent films are so much more liberated than studio films, which are governed by so much corporate requirements, just due diligence. I understand that. It's, it's a business, but it's not like that if somebody just says, hey, I want to do a movie in my back garden, and you rock up and.
Yeah. One of the, an extraordinary performance, as far as I'm concerned, of yours, and I wasn't familiar with at all, and that is in Boxing Helena, where I've never seen somebody. What I loved about it was the vulnerability you brought to that character that explains some very weird behavior. How did that project come about? How did you get involved in it?
Well, I think I certainly wasn't the first. I think the project was going to be shot with Kim Basinger and Ed Harris. And then Kim pulled out for various reasons. It fell into some kind of lawsuit, but the producer still wanted to make it anyway. I think he got Sherilyn involved, and through a circuitous route came to me. And I found it to be like a sort of Grimm's fairy tale. There was something so that I didn't find the person I was playing to be, this kind of demonic, mad, monstrous person, but somebody who was actually incredibly tender and naive, misguided. But for him, it was a love story. And whatever he was doing was about love. And that was the approach I took. because he wasn't a butcher. And Jennifer Lynch who'd written it, was directing it, was very supportive, and Sherilyn, very beautiful. It was strange film, incredibly contemporary, incredibly apposite for today. And I think when it came out in the mid-90s or something, it was hated. But people embrace it now as something much more serious than perhaps it was presented as 20 years ago.
If anyone hasn't seen it, I really do recommend it, because it's, apart from your performance as well, but I think Sherilyn's performance.
Yeah, she's wonderful.
The two of you working together, you know, when she literally has so little to work with at some points in the film as well.
Yeah, and the way it was shot was,
yeah, it was very good.
Thank you.
You mentioned earlier on doing a one-person show on Keats and Shelley, but I know you did another one-man show.
I'll send you the link, yes.
Yes. A celebration of Harold Pinter.
Yeah.
Now, how did that come about? Because John Malkovich directed it, yes?
Well, John did direct it. Came about, I'd done a play of David Hare's called Stuff Happens. And I was at lunch and Harold was there, and he was very interested in this play and he wanted to know a lot about it. And the end of lunch, and Harold had been somebody I had revered for the previous 30 years. And I had done a film of one of his plays called The Room, by which Donald Pleasance was in, and Linda Hunt, made by Robert Altman. And and I've been in his plays, but he said he was ill. He had this sort of esophageal cancer. And he said he was supposed to be doing a reading of some of his own work, but he didn't want to cancel it. Would I do it for him? And I said, I would. He said, good. Well, that means, working with me for 3 or 4 days on this extraordinary, intimate poetry and prose, which I had no idea of. Within it, in such an economical way, he reveals his intelligence, his humor, his romance, and his humanity. And those aren't things you would automatically assume applied to Harold Pinter. It was a very intense few days, but a masterclass for me, reinvented my own approach to performing, because he was a very good director as well as being an actor. And so I did his show for him. It seemed to go well, and he was happy. He sat there in the 3rd row, mouthing the words along with me. But then after he died, I repeated the show as a memorial tribute in Los Angeles, because other places things were going on, but nothing seemed to be going on there. And people came who were connected to Harold or familiar with his work, but nobody had experienced this prose and poetry in which he really revealed himself in the first person. And John didn't attend, but he saw a recording. I showed it to him. And his idea was, why don't we, refine this, evolve it, turn it into a legitimate theatrical entertainment, and play it somewhere. So we did that over a few months, over a few countries, and we took it to the Edinburgh Festival, where it was, it went down well. People liked it, and we took it to New York, and for about 5 years, I did a couple of New York runs, but toured it many, many countries and all over America. It was a great event to do that. But I was never alone on stage. Harold was always there. And in this sort of like a bird of prey sitting on my shoulder. It was a wonderful thing, so wonderful privilege. And we've talked about reviving it. I said earlier that I was supposed to be doing Keats Shelley at the Edinburgh Festival this year, but I would have added, I think, a couple of Harold shows, because it was 10 years ago that we did it at the Edinburgh Festival, 10 years this year, I think.
That is something that I would absolutely love to attend. And
I will. And if there are any pop-up shows in London before, I will. Yeah. So I had dinner with Antonia last night, and we were talking about it. So it might happen. It was it's such rich material, and something about, and he was very possessive of it, very personal to him. Didn't like anyone else reading it, but you know, he imparted to me what he wanted from it, and something seemed to work.
Well, I also have to say thank you as well, because we met shortly before I was doing my one-man show a year before last, and you gave me the best piece of advice to any actor, which was, the audience is your friend.
Yeah, well.
And it was, I have to thank you so much, because literally every night in the 2 minutes before I got my cue to go on, that was what I was thinking. And particularly, I remember it particularly on the first night before I was, standing at the edge of the stage thinking, what the hell have I just got myself into this time?
Yeah. It's so easy for the actor to believe that the audience has come to throw stones, to find fault, to point and snigger. But that's one's paranoia, that's what's one's insecurity, that's what goes into making us actors. But they've come out of love, expectation, admiration, a desire to be reflected, refracted, entertained, amused, moved. And you are the vessel for their own spirit. And that's what's their own need. You're the and it's hard to learn that. It's hard to believe it until you do.
Yes, well, that's so beautifully and poetically put. Thank you. We're almost at the end of our hour together. What I would like to end up by doing is, and there are so many other films I'd love to discuss with you, like The Painted Bird, which was actually, let's talk very briefly about The Painted Bird if we can. How did you get involved, and what was that experience like?
I had done the Pinter show we've talked about in the Czech Republic, and the director had seen it and said, I'd love to work together on something sometime. And then he got involved. Then the Painted Bird, which he'd been working on for so long, he was able to make the first section, and then he would put that together, and then he'd look for the money to make the second section, and it was done, shot chronologically. And I think just before finding, and so he never knew who his cast could be until he got each section completed. And then he called me to say, look, I'm about to soon start shooting on, I think it was the 5th section. And with Harvey Keitel in Southern Bohemia, and this bleak, depressed, depraved story within the story of the film, which, for those who don't know it, The Painted Bird by Jerzy Kaczynski tells a story of a young boy at the end of the Second World War in the hinterland of Eastern Europe, trying to find his family. So it's an odyssey as he goes through the tableau vivant of the human condition as it was, and meets with every kind of depravity and every kind of heightened and affirming positivity within people. My section was, I played somebody who took advantage of him and was cruel and narcissistic, but it was an extraordinary, deep, bleak work, and it's a privilege to explore that sometimes. And the film is a masterpiece. It's beautiful.
Yes.
It's so. It is. It's not easy to watch, but it's worth every moment.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I was particularly in your section. It's fairly quickly revealed what the problem is with the character, but it was done so subtly and cleverly, actually just done in one shot, so that you knew exactly what was going on. You experienced the full horror of it, but there's nothing explicit. There's nothing, which I think the genius of it is because it leaves it to the audience to understand and play it in their head. What's been going on. Extraordinary, and again, as I say, wonderful performance. Right, we should tie up now, and I'd like to end by asking you the luggage in the crypt questions.
Luggage in the crypt, right?
Yes. Just this idea of what would you take with you into the afterlife, as a film that you would just think, this is something really special.
Well, I've seen Zulu so many times, I almost wouldn't need to take it because I could play it in my head. But it would be a lot of fun to take Zulu or Lawrence of Arabia, or either Godfather 1 or 2, anything by Ingmar Bergman, anything by the Taviani brothers, or but if it has to be one, gosh, let's take Lawrence of Arabia.
Funnily enough, just happened to be watching it the other day on my birthday as part of my birthday celebrations, because I'd not seen it since I'd seen it.
No.
And it's just extraordinary film. Yeah. What about a book?
Well, it'd have to be the complete works of Shakespeare, but if that's a boring answer, then a single book. I read a lot, so it's I would say complete works of Dickens. Would that count? I mean, I'm trying to think of.
Yeah, no. I think, getting the complete works of things is when, whenever I think of these things, it would have to be that I've got the complete works of H.H. Munro Saki on my shelf, because it's just like, I like the fact of sitting down with a huge grape, and that both of those cover the whole of the human condition.
Yeah, sure. And massively entertaining and insightful along the way.
Yeah. What about an album?
An album? I think it would probably be The Ring Cycle. It's a long album, if that's allowed.
Of course, yes.
I think it would be that. That would be my album of choice. If that falls within the spectrum.
That definitely falls within the spectrum. Yeah, no, I like that as a smart choice, because again, there's something that's big and meaty and mythic. I remember going up the Rhine and reading all the stories. Holidays as a child, and getting the books of the original stories and so on about the Rhine maidens, etc. What about a favorite food or drink?
Favorite food? I'm not really a foodie. I mean, for me, food is fuel. And but let's, Mediterranean cuisine would do fine. But drink, I'm more particular. But if having, wine from both Italy and Spain and France, red wine can be extraordinary. Let's say a case of Vega Cecilia from the Rieba del Duero.
You'll have to message me or email me that to make sure I've got the right one.
Vega Sicilia from the Rieba del Duero.
Okay, that sounds delicious. Well, I don't drink alcohol, but I'll take your word for it. Yeah. What about a piece of visual art, a painting, a statue?
Well, the local train always pulls into Charing Cross, and the National Gallery is just across there. So whenever I'm early or I go to the National Gallery, and although there's so much to feast on, I usually end up sitting in front of Velázquez's Rokeby Venus and admiring this sort of mysterious, sensual, languid female who lies nude, looking at her face in a mirror, which he paints, but without, it's quite, she's inscrutable, but lovely.
Right, right. That's a very good choice. What about a luxury? Is there a little indulgence that you're fond of?
Caviar? I mean, sort of that kind of.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. It could be, food caviar. Or caviar.
Be my luxury.
That sounds like an excellent choice. I can see you sitting there watching your film and
yes, exactly.
Sipping wine, eating some caviar. That sounds like a great way of spending your time. Julian, thank you so very much. This has been absolutely fascinating.
My pleasure, Nick, and good to see you looking so well. And I look forward to seeing your show.
My thanks again to Julian Sands, and I really do hope we have a chance to see his one-man show, A Celebration of Harold Pinter, as it sounds fascinating. Join me next week for some more great stories from the worlds of horror, thriller, and suspense. And in the meantime, stay safe and well.